Now, Justin and I did a podcast recording, and we were talking about just the number of baby boomers who are small business owners who are going to be retiring over the next 5 to 10 years. Right. And that number is absolutely massive. Mm-hmm. So would definitely love to hear your perspective in not only, the industry where it's at right now, but your insights as far as what is to come over these, 10, 15 years.
Sure. So as far as where the industry's at right now, it's very interesting. I was told from the very beginning, when I really knew nothing about business brokerage, mm-hmm. that business brokerage is among the industries and fields that is most insulated from the ups and downs of the economy. Because when the economy is doing great, there's money, there's ambition, there's confidence. There are people who want to be business owners because they want to be business owners. Mm-hmm. When the economy is not doing so great, people are laid off. They have a few bucks from their big corporate job. They want to be their own boss because they don't want to be laid off again. And so there are people who are buying and selling businesses for that reason. And so, from an industry perspective, there's always opportunity there if you're interested in buying or selling. And interestingly enough, it's not particularly geographically focused, whereas the housing market is very geographically sensitive. Business brokerage really isn't. And so from an industry perspective, it's a pretty steady one. It takes some work to break into it, but it's a pretty steady one. In terms of what you pointed out, in terms of boomers and the transition that's happening now and will continue for another 5 to 10 years, all I can just say is if anybody's watching that is in that situation or knows somebody who is, now is really the time to begin planning. Because, we've always heard the cliche, begin with the end in mind. And when it comes to exit planning, that's really especially true. Because if you want to have a successful exit, that does not simply involve closing the doors and locking the key for the last time. If you want to actually get some money for your life's work and, walk away and pad your retirement accordingly, then you got to plan for that. And the planning involves, restructuring the business, maybe restructuring how you take deductions, getting a sense of what the business is worth now and what key factors might improve its value, stepping out of the business a little bit so that a buyer isn't intimidated by having to take on all that you as an owner do currently and figuring out how to do that. All of those are factors that need to be thought of in advance, ideally, in order to maximize value. It's the sad situation when somebody calls me or a member of my team and says, I've been diagnosed with something awful and I need to sell. And that's really a sad situation, of course, but it also impacts the value because the perspective is completely changed. There's a sense that there's no time to fix anything, and we're just going to have to deal with the sale based upon what the business is right at that moment. And that could be a big disadvantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of the small business owners I talk with, as they're getting older, as they're thinking about their retirement, like the thought of selling their business feels completely overwhelming. And there's a lot of, facets to it. And a lot of them have their personal identity wrapped up in what they've built and what they've accomplished and their product, their team, everything. There's a lot of value intertwined with that. So how do you help business owners? Like, how do you help them just get started?
Right. All right. Well, it's a personal process. I've had people cry at the closing table. And I know everybody on my team has as well, because they have invested their life into their business. Retirement is somewhat uncertain. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's anticipated as being boring. Maybe, who knows what the circumstances are. But there's a lot to consider when making that decision. And so it's absolutely important to really understand what a client's motivation is, what their timeline is something pushing them to do this. Is there a diagnosis in the background? Or a fear of one? Is there a desire to move closer to grandkids across the country or do something else that requires them to step away in the short term? And understanding what their motivation is really helpful. But also preparing them that, maybe they can achieve their objective and be closer to grandkids, for instance, to use that example, but it's going to be a radically different life, than being the boss at whatever they do and in their own company. And helping them understand that. And most of the time they say, oh, yeah, I got that. I understand. And I'm kind of ready. And then they find out that they're not quite kind of ready. But that's okay. That's part of the process. But I mean, it's all important to have a conversation, not only about the details and the numbers, but also about, what are they trying to achieve in life, on a very basic and practical level.
Yeah, no, I think you nail it spot on. Like there's oftentimes with this process an intellectual knowledge, but they haven't yet recognized it in their heart.
Absolutely.
and that's a process in of itself, and that takes time.
Sure.
And one of the things that I really encourage a lot of my clients to really think about is like, okay, well, when you retire, like what are you retiring to? What is your new purpose, right? You can't just plan to golf all day and stay at home and watch TV. Like there has to be more than that, right? So just one of the things that I found personally helping this process along is helping them to truly identify, okay, what is my new next chapter in life going to be? What does that look like? Who am I going to spend my life with, etc. So, and Justin, I know you have some perspectives on that as well. But
yeah, I mean, one of the things around that is what we talked about in another video, which we have a clip for, which is that idea of the purpose vacuum. Like so many people, it's in the head, like they want to retire, they want to do this. They think playing golf and vacationing is going to be amazing. And then they do it for about 2 weeks to a month. And then they realize that there's no purpose there. They've lost their identity, and having their identity as a vacationer is not going to do the trick. And they have to identify something that has meaning that can fill the gap of the identity that they found in being the business owner of what they were doing for 20, 30, 40 years. And if they can't do it, those are all the people that go back to work, and they're like, oh, I was missing it. They'll use an excuse like, oh, can't be under the wife's feet. It's like whatever it is, but it's really, they lost their identity. They lost their purpose, and they went looking for it. And the only place they thought they could find it again was back working,
Yeah,
sure. It's a stressor upon selling a business. It absolutely is. And there needs to be some advanced thought on what that purpose is going to be after the fact.
Well, and that's where understanding working genius as somebody who's moving towards retirement, if they've never done it before, is huge. Because really, when you retire, it should be that now you get to do things that you want to do, whatever you want to do, that you don't get paid for, but you enjoy doing. That can be work. Like I see the most happy and fulfilled retired people are doing a job. They say, I'm busier than I was when I was working, but they're happy because they're doing things in their God-given gifts and talents that they get energy and fulfillment from, and that they make an impact with. They're just working more for a charity now or for their church or whatever it is, but they're still working. It's not stop working. You should work your whole life, but you should be doing things that you love, that light your fire,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Nick, one of the questions that I'm hoping kind of take us through is like, as you're the beginning stages of helping a client, what are the common mistakes that you see a lot of people make when they're trying to sell a business themselves, or if they don't have that same knowledge and experience? Let's say they're not working with an experienced a broker in the sale and transition of the business, and how can people avoid that?
And there's a lot of common errors they might make. Some of them are easily corrected, some not. One of the initial errors would be sort of misunderstanding the value of their business, or how it would be valued even. A lot of times, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they overvalue their business, although that does certainly happen. It could be that they undervalue it, or they fundamentally misunderstand what's driving value. If the business doesn't make a whole lot of money, but it has a lot of valuable equipment, then it's going to be a challenge to sell the business for the value in excess of that valuable equipment. And that may not really click very well or be very well accepted by the business owner. On the other side, if it's making a lot of money, it's not far to look on the internet and figure out what a multiple might be relative to that number, and then just sort of pick and hope for a very high multiple when the industry, for whatever reason, doesn't support that. And so, it could be an undervaluation or an overvaluation, but that's a pretty common one. You also mentioned the business owners, and there are many who go about trying to sell the business on their own. That usually involves being a little too loose with their own numbers, maybe with competitors or key vendors or key clients even. And that can be problematic because one of the things any business owner really needs in the context of their sale is confidentiality and a tightly driven process that lets people know on a need-to-know basis when they need to know, as opposed to having things too loosely out there in the public domain without any controls. And so if you start calling competitors and say, hey, I've been at this a while, what do you think? It can become a problem in terms of, because then the competitor speaks to their next client and says, oh, them over there, they may be on their way out, probably want to work with us. Or any number of conversations can occur. Or they might be inclined to try to poach key employees and say the same thing. Hey, your boss, he or she's getting older, whatever the case may be. So the mistakes mainly center around some error in regard to valuation or just not keeping information close enough to the vest to maintain the value that you have. Those are the big ones.
Yeah. And I've seen some of these reports that you've produced for some of my clients, but you have the ability to get very, very specific with industry data and have actual data in terms of, the total revenue of the business, the expenses. And so that provides this precedence, what to work from, and at least as a starting point, right, when valuing the business. So I think that in of itself is just incredibly valuable.
It is. It's really helpful. And it dispels the idea that I'm just sort of picking a number out of a hat because there's some detailed logic to it. And oftentimes, depending upon where we are in the cycle with a client, we won't charge for that. We'll just be interested, honestly, to see, what drives the value in their business, what other businesses have sold, and provide that information. And if we're looking at a more strategic level and trying to prepare them for an eventual exit and give them something that's more concrete, so to speak, then yeah, we would charge for evaluation, applying that data to their numbers and their industry and their location, and giving them a current value as well as advice on ways to drive values up further. And so, again, with some time, they can just do better upon their exit. Another thing to mention is that oftentimes owners will have a dream of selling to a key employee or even a child or a group of their kids. And that's wonderful, but it's important also to realize they're usually leaving something on the table when they do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing so. And I can understand the idea of legacy and giving back, especially to a key employee, but it's still important that they don't jeopardize their own retirement on account of it. And whatever they do or may leave on the table, they do it eyes wide open, and it's their choice. Right. And hopefully whoever they're working with is grateful for it.